Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Corporate Scrutiny Panel. We're going to be looking today at the financial management update, and that's our only bit of business for today, but a significant bit of business as well. So I'll kick off with membership of the committee. Do people just want to introduce themselves? I'm the chair, Andrew Cooper. Councillor Taylor.
John Taylor, Kirklees.
Councillor Akhtar.
Yeah.
Councillor Greaves.
Hi, Councillor Charles Greaves, Owen Valley North, and I'm an independent councillor.
And Councillor Munro.
You're on mute, Councillor Munro.
Good start. Alison Munro, Albury Ward.
I love the way these backgrounds make it look like Charles and Alison are in the same field, which is great. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody wish to raise anything under the minutes of the previous meeting, or are we happy to accept them? Okay, fine. Does any member have any interests to declare with regard to this update? No. We're happy to admit the public in the way that we can with virtual meetings. Any deputations or petitions?
None received, Chair.
I presume on that basis we have no public questions.
That's right, Chair. None received.
Okay, so straight over to the financial management update, and Eamon Croston initially, but we have other guests as well to talk about other areas.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself this morning for purposes of this committee panel. My name's Eamon Croston, Service Director Finance, and I'm probably in the same field as two of the panel members as well, because it's such a nice morning. So I'm going to briefly go through the financial management update this morning, because I appreciate it's the substantive item on this morning's panel agenda. We do take financial management updates to this panel on a regular basis through the year, and it's a number of reasons. It's an opportune time to actually do a bit of reflection in terms of the financial outturn position for 2021, have a look in terms of what the current runes are in terms of financial management 21-22, and a bit of sort of horizon scanning and forward looking as well in terms of medium-term financial strategy refresh. So in terms of 2021 then, the outturn position was actually reported to Cabinet on the 27th of July. So there's quite a detailed report that accompanies that one, and I know it's going to Council on the 8th of September as well. So it was discussed a bit at Cabinet. So the report that you've got with you today is kind of a very summary overview, key highlights of 2021 position. And I think in particular, and we've taken extensive reports through 2021, as you'd expect, COVID impact has had a significant impact in terms of council finances, as well as every other aspect in terms of impacts on individuals, businesses, communities, council service delivery, partner organisations, voluntary third sector organisations. So what you'll find as part of the outturn position is that the general fund overall, which accounts for revenue operational expenditure other than for social housing, which is separately accounted for in a ring-fence housing revenue account, the overall year-end position was break even. And I think we'd kind of reflected at Q3 when we brought something to Corporate Scrutiny Panel tail end of last financial year that we're anticipating we might get there or thereabouts. I won't go into too much detail of the journey as to how we got there, but it's been an incredibly, I think, challenging year. But just to put into kind of start relief, really, within the general fund, we always quote a net budget position of just round about £300 million. I think it was just under for 2021. But within that, we've got significant spend, and then we've got a number of income offsets, service income offsets, and specific government grant offsets. But we spend, we would have spent in a typical year around about £600 million in revenue in 2021. This was pre-COVID. This is what was signed off as part of the approved budget in February 2020. But what we actually spent was about £200 million above and beyond that, specifically because of COVID impacted additional spend, and also significantly support to businesses. Out of that 200 million, I think 140 odd million of that was part of our administration at a local level to support the national effort to help the economy recover and keep businesses going in a concerted way. And all councils were involved in that effort, and there were considerable funding regimes that came in from government through the year as well to support the national effort. So by year end, pretty much all of that was covered by a number of funding sources. There is, as part of the appendices to this report, there's a list of all the funding streams that came through in 2021, and it's quite a long list. And some of that funding has rolled forward into 2021-22, because you'll note as well that there's been quite a significant increase in our year-end reserves position, but a lot of that is to do with COVID impacted funding and timing issues, where the funding came in 2021, but quite a significant chunk of that is going to be actually released in 21-22. Housing revenue account had a deficit in year position, but it's HRA, housing revenue account reserves, which again ring fenced, still relatively healthy at about 56 million, and that will largely continue to support the housing revenue account needs going forward, and that are factored into the long-term business plan. Collection fund was another area that was particularly hit in 2021 in terms of business rates, income collection, and council tax income collection and recovery. I'll come on to that again in the end in terms of specifics around income, because it's a substantive item. We've got two fellow officers that are here this morning. It gives panel members an opportunity to hear a little bit more about some of the specific impacts and how the services that have supported those particular impacts are managing that. So I'll bring in the officers I think fairly soon after I finish this opening introduction. So so there's also an in-year dedicated schools grant deficit position, mainly on high needs. Again, we've reported that extensively through various reports. So there was a deficit position at year end of just over 10 million. And a starting year deficit of 14 million. So it's effectively a 25 million dedicated schools grant deficit that will roll forward into 21-22. So the pressures against that activity line continue. It's not a unique phenomenon to the council, because significant number of councils have got pressures around their dedicated schools grant. Again, mainly but not exclusively around high needs pressures. And I think I've mentioned previously, and it was in the outturn report as well, that we've put together a draft management plan for the Education Skills and Funding Agency, which is an executive funding arm of Department for Education. We've had two informal conversations with the ESFA now. So the intention is to bring forward a finalised management plan that sets out a range of actions, many of which are tied into our broader transformation agenda around special educational needs and disabilities. And it's a 5-year plan. How we're going to fundamentally deliver better outcomes for supporting pupils' additional needs, and marry that against the funding available, and also specific in-year actions to bring about reduction in our in-year deficit position over time, and hopefully that will be allied to some backdated funding from ESFA to support our accumulated deficit position, some of which will be tied into funding availability to support that through the forthcoming spending review. So I think the initial prognosis on that is positive, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and obviously bring back updates in terms of how we're getting on with that conversation with ESFA, and hopefully bring something forward to Cabinet in due course as well, just to update on what's happening there. So as I said at the start, we've got two fellow officers here as well. So we've got Steve Bird, Head of Service for Welfare and Exchequer, and his part of the world in particular has been heavily involved in supporting the administration or directly delivering the administration of business grants, but also managing the impact in terms of collection fund income. And we've also got Matthew Gabbert as well, officer, who's going to talk a little bit about the impact around specifically around commercial lettings and town centre impact, and some of the issues around that, because they're again set out in this summary report, and we all appreciate that there's been not just in terms of additional spend, but there's been significant impacts in terms of service income. So that covers commercial lettings, education, catering income, car parking, whole range of sort of regulatory fees, planning fees, etc. And I think overall we identified that the outturn position for 2021 that across services across the general fund, income was about 15 million down on what it would normally be expected to be. There was a government compensation scheme that recognised that councils were going to be impacted by service income because of the local impact of national measures to around infection control, and that garnered about 8 million. So the net deficit was around about 7 million. So we used some of our unring-fenced COVID support grant to offset the balance of that, and some of that is washing through into 21-22 and beyond as well. And again, we can come back to that as part of the ongoing conversation. Again, the government's income compensation scheme for council service income losses has actually extended to the end of June, so we'll get some further income in for Q1 income compensation, and that will be reflected in as part of the Q1 financial monitoring report to Cabinet at the end of August. I think initial indications are it's going to be something over £1 million, so it's not insignificant, but we're kind of hoping that over time, as the economy and society starts to reopen, that those in-year service income losses will come down, and may or may not come back to pre-COVID levels. In all likelihood, there's likely to be some structural impacts from COVID as well that might impact on our overall income levels relative to what it was pre-COVID. And again, that's maybe an area we can touch on. So in terms of 21-22, again, it's quite early on in terms of in-year monitoring, but as I said, we'll be bringing something back to Cabinet for the 31st of August. So some of the COVID impacts are still washing through on the income side, and on in terms of additional spend. Some of it's timing issues, some of it's just reflecting the fact that we're still paying out some of the business grants. I think there's an extra 40 odd million in the current financial year to date that we've paid out. A number of those business grants are now winding down, and we've still got some specific COVID related grants around infection control, support with self-isolation payments, etc., that we're still administering in year. But as we transition from, I suppose, COVID crisis mode into what does living with COVID stroke post-COVID look like in terms of whatever business as usual is going to be for councils going forward, It's not of the scale that it was in 2021, but there are still some residual impacts that we have to manage in year as part of that transition. And some of those residual impacts will probably feed into the future medium-term financial strategy refresh, and probably impacted on by broader considerations in terms of national economic recovery and of other factors perhaps beyond our immediate control, but could impact on some of the, not just in terms of income, but demand, potentially latent demand management issues as well, on some of our statutory service provisions. So it's just something we need to be mindful of as we're going through. So also put a section into the report around medium-term financial strategy refresh, because it's kind of that part of the budget cycle where we will be looking at the annual refresh of the medium-term financial plan, and we'll be bringing something forward to Cabinet and Council in October, where we can, updating our spending and funding plans. So there are a few pointers in the report that you've got in front of you this morning around how that will be, how some of those assumptions will be managed. So it'll be a combination of national, regional, and local intelligence. So we put in as well around some of the things that are happening nationally currently, but again, the position can change. So there's a number of white papers on the go. It's not definitive. For example, I hadn't put in around the planning white paper, which perhaps I should have done as a marker. There's consultation just coming out around schools funding about the next phase, around moving to a nationally prescribed formula, what the longer term implications are might be around that. But clearly there's a lot of national commentary around adult social care. And clearly that's got significant impacts for councils with statutory responsibilities for social care, like Kirklees. Again, a lot of speculation as to what that might be, speculation as to whether we're going to have a multi-year financial settlement for local government, or is it going to be another 1 year spending review, and the extent to which any of that is going to be influenced by the extent of any bounce back in the national economy and what the implications are for public service funding going forward. It's kind of all in the mix. So as much as we horizon scan and have our crystal ball, as it were, or a number of crystal balls to second guess what that might be, I'm not anticipating by October's medium-term financial strategy refresh, we'll have an answer to most, if any, of those questions. Quite a lot of that will still be a work in progress. So I think it's important to understand that there's still some challenges ahead in terms of formulating what our medium-term financial plan, what our planning framework might be, but it doesn't stop us continuing to refresh and look beyond just the next 12 months or 3 years or even 5 years, particularly in the context of some of our longer term economic recovery plans and actions around regeneration. We do have to look sort of longer term. So we will be maintaining a 5-year revenue horizon scan, but appreciate that there will be some volatility within that. So that I think that for me just sort of underplays that while we're coming out of COVID, it hasn't gone away, and we are still to some extent beholden to sort of national government policy and intent, and you can't underestimate the global and national challenges as well of trying to formulate sort of future funding regime for public services within that kind of context. But clearly colleagues this morning will have a view on those things as well. So I'll shut up at that point, because clearly give yourselves plenty of time to come back with discussion points. I don't know if it's an opportune time to bring Matthew and Steve in at this point, because I appreciate that they're in on the call, particularly to talk around some of the income issues, and rather than leave them hanging around wait until the end of the discussion, would it be an opportune time just to bring them both in, just to describe some of the impacts from their areas, Chair?
Yeah, it certainly would. I'd be very interested to hear what they have to say. Just a heads up for everybody that the council's observing a minute's silence at 11 o'clock for the Plymouth shootings, the victims of that. And so I'll ask for a minute's silence at 11 o'clock for the meeting. Okay, so shall we start off with Matthew and then Philip?
Yeah, that's fine. My name is Matthew Gabbert. I'm a disposal acquisition surveyor at the council, working in the growth directorate, managing the commercial estate and also advising on a number of blueprint projects that we've got going on in both Dewsbury and Huddersfield. I'm a chartered surveyor. So the commercial estate there's approximately 500 lease assets within the commercial estate, which covers retail, industrial, office, and a number of ground leases too. It's managed by a small team of officers, as I say, within the growth and regeneration directorate. A bit of context: for the past sort of 5 years, the income from commercial estate has been around £2.5 million annually, and expenditure has been approximately £1 million, which gives a surplus of around 1.5 million that the commercial estate then returns to the council. And that's broadly been fairly consistent for this sort of 4 or 5 years leading up to COVID. Again, for some context, the bad debt provision from the commercial estate. So bad debt is classed as sort of unpaid invoices, was running between £300,000 and £400,000 prior to COVID. That would be rents and service charges that aren't paid in the times given to pay, and then would be chased through officers and debt recovery department to try and recover that. But there's always a sort of balancing figure there, and that used to run about £300,000 to £400,000. COVID had 2 main impacts on the commercial estate. The first one was around bad debt. When COVID hit, the council took a decision to defer 2 quarters rent, so the rent from 1st of April through to end of September for all tenants of the commercial estate. There was a decision to defer that rent. That means it wasn't written off, it wasn't credited, it was just parked for a period of time whilst we understood the impact that COVID had on businesses, and we understood how central government was going to give grants and funding to these businesses to try and get through that period of difficulty. In September 2020, Cabinet adopted the central government's code of practice in respect of commercial property relations, and that was a code of practice set out to assist landlords and tenants in coming to agreements over unpaid rent, dealing with lease renewals during COVID and various other sort of landlord and tenant implications for commercial property through COVID. The impact of that led to the council's bad debt increasing. So currently the debt position is approximately £1 million. Again, that is unpaid invoices, mainly from that period of time, and we are still dealing with tenants and traders to recover that money. We're dealing with them on a case-by-case basis, so we're talking to each individual one, asking for evidence around what sort of grants they received, and our aim is that we will come up with affordable payment plans to recover those monies. It just may be over a longer period of time that we would have done in pre-COVID days. So we're working with tenants on an individual basis, looking what they've got from central government, what they're, whether they are, how long they were asked to close for. Various different businesses have been affected in different ways, which means it's really difficult to have a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think in circumstances where there are tenants that have been hardest hit or they haven't received any support from government, then we will need to take a further paper if we are going to write any of those rents off, or if we're going to reduce rent for a period of time where they were closed. We will need to take a further decision on that when we've collated all that information. Majority of tenants are paying now, but accepting there's a area of parked rent that still needs to be paid back or to have discussions over. Central government legislation has made it quite difficult. So the sort of the ultimate debt recovery action of forfeiting a lease and taking a commercial property back is suspended until March next year. So that does cause some issues, and will continue to cause some issues if tenants don't continue to pay. Our hands are tied slightly on what we can do in terms of debt recovery for that. The other impact that COVID's had is on the income and the projected income going forward. So, as I said previously, we were generating in the region of £2.5 million income, and it was costing about £1 million to manage that. The budget figure that was provided for 21-22 was 2.8 million, and our current forecast looks that we're only going to generate 2.3. So there's a sort of a £500,000 gap there. The reason for that is COVID's really accelerated. The majority of the commercial estate, or probably £1 million of the £2.5 million comes from Huddersfield Town Centre, and it comes from retail and hospitality uses within Huddersfield Town Centre. So COVID's sort of accelerated the changes to the town centre and the retail changes. I think over the past we've seen sort of prime high street rents decline, and corporate landlords and pension funds have seen that decline. But because our estate is mainly secondary in nature, we've got a lot of independent traders and not too many sort of multinational traders. So we were sort of protected from that impact over the past few years, but COVID has brought that forward for us, and now we're seeing that impact on the secondary sort of retail and hospitality properties within the town centre. So that's really where the big impact is going to come. A number of businesses have gone into liquidation, and it's been challenging to re-let those properties with COVID, still around. And when we do re-let, we're re-letting for less rent, and we probably have to give a bit more incentive to secure lettings of those properties. So the long-term impact, there is a long-term impact on the commercial estate income, but it does give us an opportunity. So some of the re-lettings now we can carry out in line with the Huddersfield blueprint, so we can get the businesses and the uses that we'd like in those specific areas. We can promote those businesses in those areas, and we can align the commercial estate to the Huddersfield blueprint as well. Councillor Taylor, I think you've got your hand up for a question.
Just come off mute, sorry.
No,
thanks, Matthew. And thank you for that quite comprehensive update. I have got a number of comments and questions around that, if I may.
Yep.
Firstly, we talked about we now have a £1 million debt outstanding. Do we have a view on how much of that is recoverable? If you want, Matthew, rather than if I just outline a couple of questions, rather than me doing 20 questions or something. And then secondly, when we talk about the commercial estate, does that include the markets in your kind of portfolio of commercial estate? And then one of my worry beads listening to you about the work that your team's having to do to try and negotiate with our tenants about this recovery of outstanding debt is, do you have a capacity within the team to do that, or are there pressures just in terms of the volumes of discussions you need to have and the number of officers you've actually got to have those discussions? One would have thought in terms of these businesses, given that we provided most of the grant funding, we ought to have a view of what, or certainly some of the grant funding that they would have received. So hopefully we're using that intelligence to assist us. And then a final one. You talked a little bit about the blueprints, and obviously as part of the early delivery is probably the wrong word, but the early part of the blueprint work has seen us acquiring more assets. So have those assets increased our rental income at all? Because presumably even the piazza, some of it is still occupied. So presumably we are starting to receive some rents from those, or did we not get any benefit from having taken over some of those additional assets? And then just finally to say thank you, Matthew, for all the work you and the team are doing, because I know it's it's been a really difficult one to balance the need to maintain income, but at the same time support our tenants so that they're still there in 2 years' time, kind of thing, isn't it? It's not as simple as going, well, let's just cane them and get all the money out of them, because actually there's a benefit for us of them surviving, isn't there? Yeah. And so if you just want to try and come back on a couple of those.
Yeah, no problems. I think I've wrote everything down, but if I miss one, just ask me again. So in terms of the recoverable debt, so yeah, I said it was the debt is currently about £1 million. Through conversations to date, I think as a broad figure, I would suspect probably 80% should come in. A lot of businesses have been, our stance initially was to contact the businesses and ask for that 6 months to be repaid over the next 12. Yeah. Starting in, I think initially we said July, but we've extended some to September because some people are still impacted, and a number of businesses have signed up to direct debit standing orders on that basis. So the money, it will come in over a period of time. It's not coming in on a lump sum and then been sort of ticked off to visit later. That said, there will be some that will have enough evidence to suggest they were a viable business prior to COVID. COVID's really hit them, and there'll be a viable business going forward again. And they will need some additional support from the council. I mean, I suppose one of we rent to a nightclub, for example, and as much support that was there for the business, they couldn't trade for 18 months. So for me, there'll be an expectation there that we would have to, look at some support for them. They paid the rent previously on time, and I'm sure they will again once they get reopened. It's just that middle ground that we need to find a way through. So that's where I think we would be on that debt. We do hold a bad debt provision as well. So every year we calculate what we feel we'd need in the bad debt provision. So that'll be for businesses going into liquidation or businesses that we physically can't get the money back at the end of that, or personal tenants going bankrupt and things like that. So there is a bad debt provision, which I think currently stands it's somewhere between 100 and 150 grand that's set aside for bad debt issues, and that's taken off that annual income, expenditure from the annual income. So hopefully that deals with the debt question. Markets is a separate account. We don't manage markets, although I do help Chris Cotton with managing that area. So provide advice there for lease renewals and all the things that have been going on in line with the blueprints. But that is a separate account, so that's not something I can really comment on.
Yeah.
With markets, capacity within the team is a challenge. There is a number of competing priorities within our team, which is the disposal acquisitions team. So as well as managing the commercial estate, we manage the housing shop portfolio, and we manage and advise on all of the lease and sort of valuation inquiries. We do asset valuations, and more recently we've been pulled into a lot of work around blueprints, major projects, housing growth. So there is, in my opinion, a lack of surveyors within the council to carry out this work. So capacity is something I think we do need to look into. I know there's jobs out at the moment on recruitment for disposal acquisition surveyors and disposal of acquisition officers. So hopefully they close at the end of August. So hopefully we might be successful in recruiting some more people to the team through that to help us get through this. And it's not necessarily speaking to the tenants and getting agreement with tenants, it's then reletting those empty properties that we have quickly to get the income back rolling through, maintaining the properties and various other aspects of property management. So I think sort of the senior management are aware of the gaps in resource and are trying to fill those through the recruitment process. Just hopefully we will be successful within that.
So just on that, Matthew, so if we get the people appointed to the positions that you're advertising for, that should give you the bandwidth, or do you still think? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it should.
Because otherwise, I'll be suggesting we made a recommendation that they have a look at whether there is the capacity to deal with the work in that area or not.
Yeah,
but you are recruiting. That's a good sign. It shows it's been recognised and being dealt with. So
I mean, we've tried to recruit previously and not been successful. So it's whether we can find the people to do the jobs. But there is adverts out there at the moment. So I think from that we can hopefully take that forward and get some more resources in.
Okay, thank you.
Grant funding intelligence. Yeah, we've been working from the very start. We've been working closely with Steve's team, business rates team, Bernadette, to not only initially, I suppose it was our team trying to assist them in verifying who the tenants were, because there was quite a lot of fraudulent claims and people saying they were tenants when they didn't have leases and trying to claim those grants for some of those commercial properties. But now it's sort of working the other way, and we're saying, we're talking to this person, what grants have they received, and if their rent's 3,000 and they've received a grant for 10,000, then they should really be paying that rent back, unless they can prove they've it's gone on improving their business to cope with COVID. Or there's all sorts of different reasons for our discussions about that, but we are in close contact with that department and working well with them. I think your final question was around assets that we've acquired.
Yeah.
So I've been involved quite closely with acquiring various assets to deliver the blueprint. Those assets, and I might ask Eamon for some assistance, but those assets haven't been bought as commercial investments, so they don't sit within the commercial estate. Whilst they would generate some revenue, but that revenue doesn't form part of the commercial estate, because they were the Piazza, for example, was purchased as a regeneration.
Yeah, to knock down.
Not that as a regeneration property, so it doesn't sit within the commercial estate. Although I am involved in managing the Piazza and do sort of report on that back, but I don't know if Eamon, are you able to just come in and say where it does sit?
I think it sits.
It's within town centres.
Yeah, it probably sits within David's part of the world, David Shepherd. Elsewhere, I think it could be a combination of that and Colin. Probably need to bring something back just to clarify exactly where it sits. But in broad terms, I think I can concur with what you're saying in terms of it. There are a number of strategic acquisitions that we're taking the opportunity, and I think as a council that to give us some element of control in terms of how we want to shape some of the town centre going forward, and Piazza is a good example of that. So it is primarily around regen, but I think I think officer colleagues are looking at if there are opportunities to let those out on a short-term basis where it makes sense.
That's that aim, and it was more that there are existing businesses that must presumably must be paying us rent.
Yeah.
So there will be. Yeah, sorry, go on, Matthew. Yeah.
I can cover it because so I do manage on the day-to-day basis as well. So generally the Piazza it washes its face really. There's a number that pay businesses, but there's also a number of empty properties, and on empty properties we need to pay empty business rates, service charge contributions, and other bits. So there are a number of businesses there that still do pay rent. A number of businesses withheld rent through COVID, but we've managed to recover that from them now, mainly because they're national retailers that I think they were protecting their cash flow more than anything. But yeah, they did come back and paid within a lump sum. But the general revenue position on the Piazza is, I think, is around nil positive effect. I don't think it costs the council anything to hold, but it doesn't generate a great deal of surplus money.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Munro, I did see a raised hand from Councillor Greaves, but that's gone down.
Okay, thank you.
And
Thanks very much.
Obviously that we're going to be looking at revenue and exchequer, and just to remind people that at 11 o'clock we'll be having a minute's silence. So, Councillor Munro.
Okay, thanks very much, Matthew. You've given us a lot of detail actually in response to Councillor Taylor's questions, but I just wondered about hasn't there been a loss as well in relation to retailers that have permanently closed during lockdown? So, for example, Topshop, Ernest Jones, and I understand Sean Hallis is to close shortly. That's an old Huddersfield business. Have you been able to fill those vacant tenancies, and or not? And if not, what are you doing? How are you going about being able to address those issues around those vacant buildings and shops?
No, that's fine. I think there have been a number of national retailers that have vacated. I think we've seen a few at the Piazza again, but in terms of the commercial estate, we lost Thomas Cook pre-COVID, and there's been a number of other businesses that are more. I mean, the tenants within the commercial estate are more regional and local than your national retailers. But we have lost a few, and there is some empty properties, mainly around Kirkgate, Byram Street, under Kirkgate buildings. There's a few empties there, and under High Street buildings, we've got a number of empty properties there. We are using the opportunity to carry out some works to the properties to bring them back up to a standard, and also try and relet in line with the blueprint. So, Kirkgate, for example, there was a couple of businesses in there that there was an off license and a bar that were fairly difficult to manage. So going forward, once we've done these works, we will look to relet those properties to businesses that will try and complement the blueprint and what we're trying to do there. Due to the resources that we've talked about previously, we've actually appointed Edison's estate agents through procurement to help us with the reletting of properties, carrying out of viewings and putting together sort of marketing details and that. So hopefully a number of empty properties will be going on the market in the next month or so, to try and secure some more tenants. I think we've seen a shift in demand really around. I think there's still quite a bit of demand from local independent businesses. It's the national retailers that I think have really struggled, and those types of retailers that have sort of disappeared. But I do think there will be demand for our property, and people do like the council as their landlord as well, which I think we need to try and promote a bit more probably. We do charge market rents, but yeah, I think they like the knowledge that the council is their landlord, and we're quite an accessible landlord, really, I suppose, as opposed to maybe a pension fund that has an office in London and a managing agent in Manchester. So
so how? I mean, sorry, I'm just wondering how hopeful you are that you will get, you will secure tenants for those buildings.
I think we will. I think it'll take time, and I think we will need to. Obviously, we've had to relook at rents. So the rents we were previously getting will be potentially considerably less, and also the incentives that we need to give occupiers to occupy may increase. I mean, prior to COVID, occupiers would get a couple of months rent free if they were going to fit out or redecorate or make some improvements to the building. Depending on the occupier, how strong they are as an occupier, we may need to give significantly more of an incentive to get these units occupied, really.
Yeah, because I was sorry to ask you again, because I was just thinking of a lot of this is kind of dependent on how quickly the blueprint moves to a certain extent, isn't it, really? So people can see that, if they open a business in Huddersfield, actually the prospects may, actually within the next 2 years, they may actually improve a lot,
Yeah.
But I mean, so a lot is lying on the implementation of the blueprint to a certain extent, I would say.
Yeah.
So it could take a while, in actual fact, to fill those vacant buildings.
Yeah, I mean, we do use blueprint in when we talk to tenants, and some of them are prepared to, be the first person there, and then they've got their pitch there, and when the blueprint moves forward, they will benefit from that. So I think it can work both ways. I think people still see an opportunity there. A lot of our assets are around the sort of St George's Square area, which tends to be, I think, is moving forward from a blueprint perspective quicker than maybe say the Piazza area at the moment. So that people do see the works to Wood Street, for example, where Wood Street's been there's put a temporary traffic regulation order, and it's pedestrianised of an evening, and people have seats out there. So people do see that and are making inquiries on that basis. So yeah, it is linked very closely to the blueprint, and we're working with Simon Taylor on that to try and link the uses that we let the properties for to make it sustainable. Really, that's what we want to try and achieve, some sustainable, this income being sustainable and not maybe just a one-off, and then we have to re-let further in the future. So that's a challenge. It is challenging. It is it's still challenging.
Very.
But no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Greaves.
Yeah, hi. Matthew, there's a common misconception that Kirklees owns all of the properties within the Ring Road. Yeah. And I appreciate that. I think it's just over 100 years ago since Huddersfield Borough bought Ramsden Estate. But can you give us just a rough idea, perhaps, of how much Kirklees Council owns of commercial properties within the Ring Road area? If you can give us a rough percentage, that might be helpful.
My guess would probably be about 10%. I mean, I can tell generally where we've got council offices, the retail underneath, we'll manage that. So High Street buildings, Kirkgate buildings, Somerset buildings on Byrom Street. We own Byrom Arcade, estate buildings opposite the railway station. And then we do have a block on New Street as well, 2 to 14 New Street, which is near the marketplace area of New Street. But really that's our limit. Although recently we've acquired the Piazza, which has increased that slightly, and made a couple of other acquisitions, or in the process of making a couple of other acquisitions. But no, it's not as much as people think. We do get a lot of enquiries through our team from people, like say, who think the council own everything, or what are the council doing with this property? Well, there's very, very little we can do. I mean, one of the confusing factors for some people is that the council still own the freehold of the majority of the town centre, but that's a high proportion that is subject to 999-year leases. So it doesn't really give the council any real level of control over what those assets are, what happens to those assets, or what they're used for. But yeah, we're through the commercial estate. It's mainly secondary locations, independent retailers, the prime areas, the Packhorse, New Street, Kingsgate is all privately owned. Imperial Arcade is owned by a pension fund. The far end of New Street is, both sides of that are owned by pension funds as well. So yeah, it is quite limited what we own and what we can control through the commercial estate management.
Thank you.
I can circulate a plan if that would help afterwards, if just the ones that we own and manage through our team.
That'd be interesting. Thanks. Questions from me. I'm just wondering if we've got a list anywhere showing how many, in terms of total number of properties that we've got within each area, and so the numbers of those which are vacant, and those are those that are let, or the ones that are, if you like, under management, but that need. And so it'd be interesting to see those sort of figures, and it'd be. I don't think there's a lot of visibility of the work that you do, and I think it really would be good if we had more visibility of what it is you were doing.
Yeah.
So it would be good to see, snapshots at the end of each year to see if you're making progress in terms of letting, if you're not. And so that would be a good thing to see. And also, if there are things like what you would call management voids because they've got repairs or works that need doing to them, or where they're ready to let, and we simply haven't got those out. So that would be really interesting for me, and for the rest of the panel as well. We're very much working in a competitive environment, and that's been alluded to earlier. And I'm just wondering how we go about working out what our offer is and what makes us what makes us a business of choice, and how we compare with others. I know we've taken over management of Friendly Street from the media centre as well, and I'd be interested to know how. I know it's a difficult time and everything, but how it's going, and whether we're actually taking on more tenants now we've got it in management. That'd be quite interesting as well. I think that'll do. I mean, I did notice you said it takes £1 million to manage the council's estate, to bring in an income of in good times of £2.5 million. That sounds to me. I look at that and think, how's that? Is that good? Is that bad? How would that compare with the other landlords? Is that what that ratio just feels? I don't know. I just wonder how we would compare that with other providers of commercial property.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I think commercial properties tend to compare each other based on yields, but on that basis, the council would have had to buy the properties so because we sort of inherited the properties, or we've managed the properties, to have that yield comparison is quite difficult. A high proportion of that £1 million, or a proportion of that £1 million, is providing sort of expenditure that's then recharged. So say common areas, for example, in Barham Arcade, you've got to light, you've got to clean, you've got to caretake for Barham Arcade. So that incurs a cost, but that then generates that money back through the service charge that's charged. So that goes back into your income. But no, I'm happy to have a look into that and how we might benchmark that against other operators or other service providers. I think that it does provide a 1.5 million surplus is a reasonable surplus, I believe. And again, the challenge is to make that sustainable, and make that sustainable going forward. In terms of how we could badge ourselves as a different to the other landlords, I think, as I said previously, we are more accessible than other landlords. Also, we do link to Yvonne Walsh's team in business Chris Duffield's area of the world. So we link up with what other business support can be provided outside the sort of the general landlord and tenant relationships. I know it's Yvonne's world that's managing the Friendly Street building. I know they've secured a couple of new tenants, but yeah, I can ask for a bit of an update on that from Yvonne and feed that back as well. And yeah, there's no problem in providing some, regular updates. I think that would be really useful for the team as well. I think it's good for the rest of the team to be recognised and acknowledged on the work that they do to bring that money in and collect that money in. And sort of we've got, I think, a big role to play in what the town centre looks like moving forward, which is good.
Okay. Any supplementary questions from members? We've got about three and a bit minutes before we move on. On that basis, I'd just like to ask, just raise another point. Really, I've talked to a number of bars in Huddersfield Town Centre, as I happen to be in them, and they raised the point that their costs have risen due to COVID, as well as their income has been lost, and their costs have risen because they've had to employ more staff to keep an eye on the customers and to see where they are and aren't going. And sometimes they've said, I don't think the council's necessarily appreciated that it's not just loss of income, but it's also a higher rate of costs, higher costs, and that really is something that when they're chasing us for money, they don't necessarily appreciate.
I think if we'd look at that on the basis of, what surplus do they, after they've taken their costs off their income, what have they got left, and what can they then put forward in an affordable payment plan to cover some of these arrears? I think, if they are still generating, an income and the owner takes a wage out of it, then and there is some left, then from my point of view, I think they should be, paying those arrears off over a period of time that's affordable. So it would be something that we look at when we're trying to establish what's affordable and what's not, in terms of not just income but costs as well. And I mean, I suppose there's always a balance, and people sometimes, in the good times when they were making lots of money, they don't come and pay extra rent to you. So there's always a balance. But that's the point of the code of conduct, is to work with the business and to see what they can afford. And again, hopefully in most circumstances we'll get to an affordable payment plan. It might mean that money that we deferred comes in over a number of years, but it's a better solution than having to write it off or credit it for the council, which is, we're employed to help the council's position. Right.
Okay. We are currently at. It's awkward arranging these things, but I think it's right that we do. We're approaching 10:59, so I think rather than start a new question, a new round now, we'll have a little break, which will then take us through to 11 o'clock. So in about 45 seconds, we'll do that, and then we'll move things on from there. And has anybody got any other issues before we move on to Steve?
I don't know if Councillor Munro might have a quick question. I don't know.
But you'd have to come off mute and be quick.
All I want to know is the buildings that you talked about, where you're doing a bit of maintenance work to improve them for tenants in the future. Can you pass those costs on? Are you able to pass those costs on to the tenants? Because you said you're having to offer them at lesser rent than previously. So
no, the vacant units the council would have to pay for.
5,
right, okay. Right,
4,
thanks.
3, 2, 1. Okay, a minute's silence now. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll now move on. Just a quick thing for me, Matthew. Thanks for the report. How do we actually make your work more visible in terms of your key performance indicators? I presume there's maybe some report that might go into cabinet that we might look at, but how is your work visible to to members more generally?
That's something I'd have to just check with our head of service. I'm not sure how it does get reported up, other than within Eamon's financial reports. So I'll have a chat with our head of service and see, which is David Martin, and see how best we can do that or move that forward.
I think it's something that the general public would be really interested in. When as Charles was mentioning, there's all this perception that we own the whole of the town centre, and therefore when there's an empty shop, it's our problem. It would be great to be able to turn around to people and say, actually, this is what the council owns, and actually a large proportion of that is actually let.
Yeah,
and that compares well with private sector landlords within the town centre. So I think there's a story to tell there, that and a way of making it really visible to members, and that's one of my main concerns, really. One of the things I'd really like to come out of the meeting today, if we can find some.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're successful in recruitment, and we'll have a bit of resource to be able to put it as well. So that's been the sort of the challenge. There's always been something, that's I always needed doing from an urgent basis, and some of these other things fall off the radar slightly. But
I always look at it that even if it's bad news, it's good for the service because it puts attention on it. If somehow or other things are not going too well, then hopefully the members will say more resources required to enable more to come out, or whatever it happens to be. That visibility that your service has will be of greater benefit. So
okay.
And good to see Councillor Davies is here, the cabinet member. So I've noted that. It's good to see. Okay, we'll now move on to Steve Bird from the Exchequer.
Morning, everybody. I'm Steve Bird, Head of Welfare and Exchequer Services, and just so you're aware of what my service covers, it covers council tax, business rates, sundry debts, collection, client financial affairs, housing benefit, council tax reduction, local welfare provision, DHP, free school meals, blue badge, advice Kirklees. Obviously does the self-isolation payments and the food bank stuff. So that's roughly a potted history of what my service does. I'm just going to chat to you about business rates first, and then council tax. So I'll run through a bit of a summary of what's happened and what's coming up and what the recovery plans are for each of those areas. And it does link into what Eamon and Matthew both talked about as well. But I'll start with business rates, if that's okay. So for business rates, it's been probably the most challenging year I've ever known since I've worked for the council, since September 1990. And the business rates arrears are currently at, rolled over at the 31st of March, were £15.5 million, which is the highest we've ever known. The average is usually about 4.5 million. So there was 11.7 million from 2021, which was purely, the majority was COVID related, and about 3.8 million from all previous years. And as I say, the average is normally about 4.5, so it wasn't well above, more than 3 times higher than the previous level. Bad debt provision has also shot up to 11.2 million. Normally in the fullness of time, collection is about 98.5%, which is really good. But that's been adjusted down now to 96.25%. So obviously we've reduced the collection and increased the bad debt provision because of the outstanding arrears have shot up. Just in terms of in-year collection, so this is for 21-22, As at the 1st of August, we'd collected 24.87% of the net debit, which is down on target by 4.63%, or 4.9 million in monetary terms. In terms of the arrears that we rolled forward, they've also come down by about £4 million. So the offset, if you like, or the difference, I would say it's more or less broke even. We've reduced the arrears by 4 million, but in-year collections down by 4 million. And it's still really difficult out there. As was mentioned by Matthew, there's lots of businesses that are struggling. Some have done fine, and it is a balance, and collection will be a balance moving forward. In terms of the grants, the restart grants and the support and help for businesses, we've administered 15 grants since the start of March for businesses. £173 million we've paid out in total. That's been mainly done by the business rates team. We've paid out to over 11,000 plus businesses. And at the peak, just to give you an idea of the additional work, we had 85 additional staff helping out on the business rates team. And there's only usually 9 people on that team. And at the peak, there were 85 people helping. We've also, since the 1st of April, granted extended retail relief to the same sectors, retail, hospitality and leisure, 34.6 million. And all those businesses have got new instalments started in July and August. So basically this was a national scheme where they granted 3 months at 100% relief, and then a remaining 9 months at 66% relief. So the combination of both those two is basically equates to 75% has been awarded in relief for the entire year. We are moving back towards business as usual, but obviously those people who've been awarded extended retail relief, we've not taken any recovery action against that group because their instalments only in July and August, so we've yet to find out how many of the most affected group will pay. In terms of other relief, you may recall that the government on the 25th of March announced a new business rate relief fund nationally of 1.5 billion, which we've called the Material Change of Circs legislation. We're still waiting for that to come through from the government. There's a bill waited in Parliament. It's called, I'll try and read it out because I can't remember, Rating Coronavirus and Directors Disqualification Dissolve Companies Bill. Short and snappy, that. But it's not received royal assent yet, and it's due to go back to the Commons, I believe, on the 9th of September. So it is imminent. But we will need to look at wherever criteria come from that scheme, along with the funding. So we don't know how much funding Kirklees will get. We don't know the criteria. And we'll probably be looking for some kind of West Yorkshire scheme. So there will be a delay, even when we get the legislation and the funding, to actually comprehend what that will mean for the businesses. And this is for businesses outside retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. So this is for everybody else who's not got the grants. So a lot of those businesses are struggling, and those are the ones we'll have been taking recovery action in the early part of the year again. So I'll cover what's happening in business as usual as well. But just for reference, I know Matthew talked about the delay in recovery and collection and business as usual, but all the courts, the magistrates' courts and the county courts were shut during COVID, so there was no recovery action for council tax or business rates because we weren't able to go to court because they were all shut. So the amount of business rates recovery was 0 last year, and all the business rates team have been doing grants. So we've ended up with quite a lot of suppressed demand. We've obviously not taken recovery action for a year. We've got the arrears I've already talked about, but the courts have reopened back up. So we've done the first set of reminders, 3,163 reminders. We have got backlogs of work on the business rates team. So we've excluded all that from this recovery action. But we issued summonses on the 7th of July, 989 summonses totaling £11 million plus, which is the highest number we've ever run. 6 times higher than normal or typical numbers. And we had the first liability order court on the 29th of July. We obtained 651 orders, roughly equating to about £7.5 million. So what we've done in the first part of the year has been trying to catch up with all the outstanding work, but obviously we've been answering the phone, trying to make payment arrangements very much along Matthew's model, where we've been trying to make arrangements, suitable payment arrangements that were affordable. We're also aware that this new relief, the MCC relief, may clear some of these accounts down. But we don't know yet, because we don't know which business sectors it affects or how much funding the council's been awarded. We're also looking to secure liability orders, which is normal practice, but we're holding enforcement action pending the relief, and obviously we've tried to make interim payment arrangements where we can. For the high value debts, we've got the enforcement team. Just so you're aware, the council has its own internal bailiffs called enforcement officers, and always has had for quite a number of years. So that team is actively phoning the business rates or the business rate cases that are in arrears now for all the high value cases, with a view to trying to make suitable arrangements with them, or to find out where they're at in terms of their own recovery or how the business is performing. Very similar to Matthew's model. In terms of work outstanding, when we opened up on the 1st of April, we had a backlog of 3,000 cases in business rates. Usually it's running at about 400 items, 400 to 600 items is a normal head of work for that team. As at the 6th of July, we've got that down to about 2,000 items, and I checked on the 12th of August and it's still about 2,000 items. So we've more or less held us own. I think I calculated it gone down by 25 items, but as far as I'm concerned, it's more or less the same. But we have dealt with all the recovery action and all the contact from the businesses, and obviously all that's died down now, apart from we've obtained the orders, and we are contacting them afresh if they've not already made contact with us. In terms of the resilience and the succession planning for business rates, we've recruited 2 new apprentices, and they're just starting their training. And we've also done some growth bids. I've submitted some growth bids to Eamon for the revenues team, which is council tax and business rates, for an extra 8 staff, and that's been approved. Overall, in welfare and exchequer, we are increasing the staff numbers by 26.5 staff to deal with the extra demand. And we also have succession planning approval for an extra 21 staff on top of that. That's to deal with the ageing workforce, which I'll come on to. If it's okay, Chair, I'll run straight through the council tax one as well, and then pick up any questions at the end. Yeah. Is that okay?
That's fine, Steve.
Yeah. So on the council tax side, then it's a similar theme, although not as bad as the business rates side, and to a certain degree, the council tax collections held up much better. And in terms of arrears, rolled forward at 31st of March, the arrears were approximately 21.23 million. And since then, they've gone down by about 3 million. This is as at the 1st of August. So the arrears brought forward, if you like, are 18.2 million. And just to give you some context behind that, the annual debit raise for council tax is £235 million. And for business rates this year, it was £84 million. So that's what we're trying to collect as the collectible debit. And then the arrears are on top of that. So obviously it's the collectible debit plus the arrears is the ask that we're trying to collect for the council to run its services. The main issue for council tax last year, as well as the delays in any court action and recovery action, were obviously the increase in council tax reduction. So people losing their jobs and having reduced income meant that the council tax reduction numbers shot up. So we've got an extra 3,000 claims for council tax reduction. And just as a comparison, that's pushed the annual award for council tax reduction up by 6 million since April 2019. So the council's having to find an extra £6 million in income to support that. We did get some top-up grants and hardship grants for that. Certainly in year one, I think it was about 4.9, and in year two, something like 5.2, and we've got the £150 hardship scheme still in place this year. And that ends on the 31st of March 2022. And that's probably one of the biggest risks moving forward, because we've granted additional support. So we've topped up the normal CTR scheme, which is 80%, so 20% to pay. But on top of that, we've awarded this £150. So anybody who had a bill outstanding after the CTR was awarded, we've granted up to £150. If they had less than £150 outstanding after their CTR award, it knocked it down to zero. But anybody who had at least £150, we've awarded this extra top up with the government grant funding. And that theoretically comes to an end unless the government come up with some more funding, or we agree a new scheme or a new top up scheme as part of the budget process, which we're currently we're starting to look at now. But if there's nothing put in place, then we would have an extra £1.5 million to collect over and above what we would normally this year because of the reduction in the relief. There's also probably the other main two risks are suppressed demand, because we've got a backlog in recovery action and cases due to the courts being closed and people still being on reduced financial income due to furlough. So we don't know what's going to happen with furlough, and that may well spike the CTR numbers again as people lose their jobs if the companies don't take them back. Distribution of food, free school meals, business rates, council tax, etc. But we're running slightly over establishment. But overall, in terms of council tax collection this year, although we've had difficulties with recruitment, I think we've done 3 recruitments this year, and only 2 of those have been partially successful. So we're not getting the numbers, even though there's a lot of people unemployed. They're just not applying. As an example, for the apprentices, we've just asked for 13 apprentices and we've recruited 6. Just aren't the numbers. And we've also altered the recruitment process, made it simpler. So you just have to fill in a CV now. You don't even have to fill in complex council form or have any experience. So just in terms of council tax collection then, council tax collection is currently running at 34.89%, which is up on target, 0.88%, which in monetary terms is about £2 million. And that's mainly due to council tax reduction awards, but overall collection is up. Welfare and Exchequer Services manage all the recovery calls. So we've had everybody on the phone, or most people on the phone, since we've started back up with recovery. And the answer rate's at 93% for the calls, which is excellent. We usually, or the contact centre usually use a benchmark of 80% as an average for customer contact for phones, but obviously the answer rate's at 93%. I think the things that we try and do when the customer contacts is obviously make a suitable payment arrangement, as you might expect, but we're also trying to maximise the customer's income. So because we manage the welfare benefits teams as well, we're making referrals into those teams all the time to maximise people's income, and we're also pushing people into the CTR scheme if we think they're eligible. So if they don't have any council tax reduction to pay because they're on a low income, we'd want them to be in the CTR scheme and be means tested. It's also worth bearing in mind that the council is able to recover the 20% that it charges through third-party deductions from benefits once it obtains a liability order, and it deducts £3.75 a week from benefits such as universal credit once it gets to the later stages of recovery action. And that's a national scheme. It's not just what the council does, it's a national part of the scheme. Just to give you some context in terms of council tax reminders on a normal year, so this is 2019-20, we issued 72,247 reminders. We summonsed 28,252 people, and we obtained liability orders for 22,351 of those. Last year, we were able to start recovery for council tax in September, and we did 4,738 liability orders, so 21% roughly last year is what we did of the normal recovery, and I don't know, 79% worth of the reminders. We issued 57,000 reminders last year in the last 6 months of the year. This year so far, we've issued 31,648 reminders, and we've obtained 9,411 liability orders. But as I say, the main part of the recovery is to strike a balance between getting people to pay rather than taking the higher level recovery action. And that's what we're trying to do. The other probably suppressed demand, normally we do single person discount and review all the exemptions. We've got sort of 65,000 single person discounts. We'd normally review those automatically in any given year, probably biannually. And we should have done those last year, so we'll be looking to pick those up in the latter part of this year, early part of next year, because we've not done that work. And that would increase the council's income because it takes some people who forgot to notify us that the circumstances have changed off single person discount. And we'd review the exemptions as well. As I mentioned before, we're recruiting, so we've got the 48 temporary staff, which we're looking to crystallise and make as many of those as we can permanent, which we're in the process of doing. On the revenue side, which is council tax and business rates, we're recruiting an extra 8 staff from the growth bids that Eamon's approved. And as I mentioned, we've got the succession planning approval, which is, we've done a business case for that, and that's also been approved. And we've appointed 3 new assistant senior managers, which will sit on my management team, one of which is Bernadette, who I think Matthew mentioned is the head of business rates team. She's been promoted, and she's now an assistant senior manager, along with 2 other new people who are starting in September. We've got 5 trainee team managers to recruit, and that recruitment's due in September, and we've got to finish off the apprenticeship recruitment because we only got the 6 I mentioned earlier, so we've got another 7 apprentices to take on, as well as the growth bid recruitments. And that's sort of a potted history of both. We don't really have a backlog of work on council tax, so it's more suppressed demand. With the recovery action, you can be as busy as you want to be, and that's where the demand is. We don't have any backlogs of work. We've got a lot of automation in council tax, and you can go online and fill an electronic change of address in, and that will update the system automatically. Your bill comes off within 24 hours. So that's not where the pressures are.
Okay, Steve, thanks very much for that. Currently, we have 2 questions lined up. Philip Challoner, do you want to go first? Philip?
Yes, hello. Yes, I've just had to unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, there are 2 things actually. One is, I think, looking at the percentage here on page 12 of our notes here, that you've managed to marginally increase your council tax collection as a percentage compared with the pre-COVID year, which is quite remarkable. But is that including the sort of the compensations from government grants, or is that direct? I don't know. We'll perhaps you answer that one. And the other thing was, you mentioned that we had a 21.2 million end of year deficit. Does that include the West Yorkshire Authority component? Because the notes we've got here was 17.1.
Yeah, it does include the precepts, so it includes fire and police, and the parishes, obviously, if there is any elements for that. I'm not sure which figure was in the financial report, but that's everything, including costs to collect as well. So, as well as charges, it will be costs. So if we've charged any costs for court or anything like that, it will also be in this 21.3.
And I guess we have to pay that forward to the West Yorkshire Authority, whether we get the money in or not, do we?
Well, they would bear their proportion of the bad debt provision if we're unable to collect it. So obviously they're very interested in the collection in the same way as we are. So yeah, we obviously liaise with the precepting authorities when we look at the CTR scheme and any changes we're making to the council tax schemes.
Thank you.
In terms of your first question about the CTR, a proportion of the increased collection is to do with council tax reduction. As I mentioned before, we are awarding more relief. So this year we've awarded about 1.5 million, but collection still is slightly ahead of target by about 500,000. Best in West Yorkshire for CTR collection last year.
Well done. Thank you.
Good one. Yeah. Okay, next, Charles Greaves.
I've got two kind of distinct questions. One's around the apprenticeships. Is that something that the department manages itself, or is Kirklees HR running that for you?
We manage that ourselves. We've taken on 2 batch of apprentices already in the pre-COVID. Because obviously we've been doing succession planning as well for probably 3 or 4 years now. So we manage that ourselves. So I took on 2 assistant senior managers in 2018-19, and they've more or less completed, or they're in the process of completing their qualifications. And in terms of the officer apprenticeships, they've all moved into permanent roles. So we recruited them as apprentices, and then they've done their apprenticeships, and now they've got permanent roles. And we're effectively now using new burdens funding, which the government gave us to do a lot of these new initiatives to recruit some more apprentices. And obviously we've looked at the age of the workforce, and we're all not getting any younger. So my management team, I think every one of them, apart from the new assistant senior managers, is above 50. A couple of them are 60 plus, but the majority, 57%, are above 55. So could actually retire at any point. And I've got a similar number at the trainee team manager level. It's better at the officer level because we've been doing a bit more recruitment at that level. So the age profile at the officer level is better than the management tiers. But the reason for taking on the high number of apprentices this time is because we're having difficulty with the recruitment. So we're taking those over establishment with a view to integrating them back into the workforce over the next 24 to 36 months. So it's more of a medium term financial planning.
And then the other point is in respect of council tax reduction. So it's great about the £150 top up that's been given. That'll take a lot of pressure off. I'm not sure if you recall, Steve, but I've worked on the other side of debt support. In terms of the business rates, are we directing people towards business deadline and insolvency practitioners so they can get professional help? Because quite often we get people burying their head in the sand. We're quite good at doing that on council tax, but I've never really had a clear view on business rates. And obviously, having defaulters speak to somebody who knows what they're doing often either results in a more effective payment plan or resolution of the issue quickly, or at least moving to a formal solution a lot quicker and with less hassle and cost, rather than going through all the legal process. So are we encouraging business rate debtors to get help? We're doing that proactively.
We are doing that for both council tax and business rates, and we also have an arrangement with the Citizens Advice and Law Centre. We fund the Citizens Advice and Law Centre to provide debt advice on behalf of the council independently. So we do make referrals to them for both business rates and council tax. A lot of the businesses are not limited companies, a lot of them are sole traders as well, so they are individuals and trading in their own right. So, but wherever possible, if we identify somebody's got multiple debt or they're struggling, we would try and move them into the advice and debt structures that are available. There also is a compliance stage for all recovery for council tax and business rates. There's what they call a vulnerability process, which is called compliance in legal terminology, where we're legally obliged to have like a cooling off period where we write to the business or the charge payer and we encourage them to contact us with a view to discussing their arrears. So this is on top of all the other stuff we have in place, but there is a framework for that to actually happen within both council tax and business rates, and it's part of the legislation.
Yeah, just to be clear, whilst Kirklees funds Kirklees Citizens and Law Service General Services, the debt advice is funded by Money and Pension Service.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but we do, a part of our funding is to provide independent advice for Kirklees residents, though. Yeah.
The legal process for collections is very, very cumbersome, and a couple of years ago, I think the example was given of Newcastle's really high collection rates, and the reason that their collection rates are really high is because they don't try to collect from lots of people who are going to struggle. So previously, when we had council tax benefit, we'd have lots of people who'd be getting 100% benefit. Council tax reduction leaves lots of people on limited benefits with a bill to pay. Our system, well, we reduce that remaining liability on young families and people with disabilities, but we leave the maximum liability payable by those benefit claimants who are on frequently on the lowest level of benefits. So if you're a single adult job seeker, you're going to have a council tax bill to pay, but very limited resources to actually pay it with. So one of the things I'd be interested to know is, from the pool of people entitled to council tax reduction, how much is that remaining liability? So how much are we expecting to collect from them? How much do we actually collect? How much do we write off? And what's the cost financially in terms of managing that entire process to effectively squeeze blood out of a stone?
Well, I think I can answer your propensity to pay and the ability to pay question. I'll cover that first. That our scheme, you may recall, originally 2013-14, when council tax reduction came in, was higher. There was a higher proportion to pay, so it was less generous. We modified that scheme based on ability to pay and reduced the bad debt provision. And the 20% is actually a calculation based on ability to pay, and it's based on the £3.75 a week, which I mentioned to you before, which is what the government set at 5% of whatever benefit the customers on. So for universal credit, we can deduct 5%, a maximum of 5%, and it works out to roughly about £3.75 a week. So the 20% that we ask them to pay based on a Band A equivalent is basically the 20%, or it was less than that. So I had a conversation with him, and strangely enough, earlier on last week about readjusting the council tax reduction scheme to reset the propensity to pay and ability to pay, because what's happened over a period of time is as council tax has risen, the net debit raise is also rising. So as an example, in April 2019, the debit raise for council tax was 218 million. It's now 235 million. So it's gone up 17 million pounds in those 2 years. And what's happening now is we're getting to the threshold of 20%. So in order to maintain that, we've either got to increase the bad debt provision or make a more generous award for CTR, which I think is the point you're making, Councillor Greaves. So I had a discussion earlier on this week about what we would do in the transition between where we are now for the £150 and when we reset the new scheme. In order to reset the scheme, we have to go out for public consultation. And in theory, if the council awards another £1 million, then the burden of that scheme falls on the rest of the rate payers or the charge payers. The council starts to make good the £1 million. It doesn't suddenly get the £1 million from government like it used to do in the form of a grant. It has to find the £1 million. So I think that's the important thing that you need to understand, is that if we made it more generous and gave £5 million more, we could reduce the liability, but the council still has to find the £5 million.
Yeah, I guess where I'm coming from is if we put an extra two, let's take your £5 million example. It might be that after a long and cumbersome process and over an extended period of time, we might actually manage to get 3 million of that 5 million in. We write the other 2 million off. But if it's cost us £2.5 million to get that £3 million in through additional staffing and court costs and paying collectors and bailiffs, well, we've caused a lot of upset and a lot of work.
It doesn't quite work like that though, because the external bailiffs, if we use external bailiffs, don't charge us a fee, they charge the customer.
Well, they charge that, they charge that to the customer.
So that is cost. Yeah. That doesn't cost us anything.
Well, it kind of does, because it means they're going to default on next year's council bill, and then we just roll through this process year in, year out, never ending.
But the people on low income, as I've said, wouldn't go to the bailiff anyway. We'd do a deduction from their benefit at £3.70 a week. So they're not even in your pool. If we can deduct it from their benefit, we write to the DWP and they deduct it on our behalf and send us a 13-week schedule.
And just to be clear,
so that runs automatically. It runs automatically in the background. There's no cumbersome process. And just to put into context, the council tax and business rates collection is very, very efficient. The most efficient collection of any tax in the country. If you look at in I don't know, HMRC, 85% is what they collect in the fullness of time. We collect 98.5%.
Yeah,
massively efficient. So it's not by no means inefficient. It's very efficient.
So to do those deductions from benefits, I'm right in thinking you do still need to take the person into magistrate's court and get that liability order first.
Yeah.
So
we would do that, but obviously we'd waive the costs and then just deduct the charge. We have a 68% bad debt provision on costs, deliberately high, so we can reduce the costs and just charge people the charge so they're not in hardship. So we use it as a mechanism. You have to have a liability order in order to make the deduction.
Yeah.
So that's a statutory part of the process. We're not able to deduct without the order. What we do have control over is the costs, because that's an additional burden, and that would normally come to the council as income. But we write off some of that income so we can collect the charge in order to provide the services.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that we end up running up an awful lot of costs to get this money out of effectively. Well, the ones who have the lowest rate of council tax reduction are quite often the ones who are on the absolute lowest level of benefits.
Yeah, but as I said, we would write off the cost. So if we charge them £105 costs,
yep,
it would take 2 years and 6 weeks to clear that at £3.70 a week. That's what we calculated, which means they'd have 3 years worth of debt. So we don't do that. We write off the costs and then we send the net amount to the DWP, yep, which is just the charge.
Yeah.
So once they get onto that charge cycle, it just comes off at £3.75 a week.
Okay. But that £105 charge is then getting picked up by every other ratepayer, isn't it? So we go through this process of to squeeze money out.
Not strictly speaking, no.
Oh, okay.
Because so it's a fixed cost, isn't it, at that point? I mean, I can go through it with you in more detail if you want outside the meeting. So that's probably the best way to do it, isn't it?
Please.
So I'm just a bit, just clarifying that. Those court costs have to be met by somebody. So if we're not then passing those costs on to the individual defaulter, they're coming out of council funds.
The cost of the recovery action and the team comes out of the revenue budget like anyone else's funding does out of the general fund. So it's just like social services or adult services, children's services, they all come out of the same fund. There's cost income to offset that's about £2.1 million in total. Yeah, I can go through it with you in more detail. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Munro, over to you.
Hey, thank you. My question is actually a bit similar to Charles's. So you told us that you collect 98.5%. That would be in a normal year. So I just wonder what the time frame is from obtaining the liability order to obtaining payment and costs, and what percentage of liability orders are you usually able to recover? Well, so in a normal year, you're usually able to recover 98.5% of liability orders. But what have you calculated what the with the impacts of COVID and furlough? Have you kind of had any thoughts about you might not get 98.5%, for example, this year, or is that something you factored in?
Yes, it's already factored into the account. I think Matthew touched on the bad debt provision, but we adjust the bad debt provision along with Eamon's teams throughout the year, and it has theoretically a reset around the charge setting time and at year end. It's basically reset, but we've already adjusted the bad debt provision. It's not changed markedly. We've increased the provision slightly on council tax, but it's still in the 98.4, maybe rather than 98.5. So
it's a lot then.
So it's marginal because, and as I mentioned before, collection at the moment is only down by it's up by 0.88% on council tax, but in monetary terms, that's £2 million.
Yes, right. Okay,
so,
all right, thanks.
Yeah. So it only adjusts a small percentage, but it can be quite large in monetary terms.
Okay, and just out of interest, how long does it usually take you to actually recover your money through a liability order? What's the time frame? What's the usual time frame?
We don't have an average time frame because some people pay instantly. So it's a whole mixture. Some people pay before they get to the liability order stage. We issue a minimum of 2 reminders. Normally, if somebody pays on one reminder, we'd issue another reminder, and then if they defaulted on that or paid that reminder, we then issue a final notice. So there's a series of reminders, and people can pay at that stage.
Right.
The final notice makes the full balance due. So then pay in full at that point. We then issue a summons, and they can pay in full at that point, and we offer a discount for prompt payment. Rather than charging the costs in Councillor Greaves' analysis, we offer a £80 discount for payment of costs early. And all those things into account, as well as the liability order. I mean, some people pay before it gets to that stage, and some people pay after. So we don't really have an average.
What you have a percentage then of roughly of people who pay after, once you've actually
I could
obtained
probably
the
have a look. I think we're quite
summons.
difficult to forecast. I think
Yeah.
it'll change
I think
week
it's going
by
to change.
week. So,
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I would
I'm
imagine
not
it's,
sure what
yeah.
it'll tell. Not sure what it would tell you.
Right. Okay.
I'm not
I
sure
won't
what.
ask anything further. Yeah.
The only
just
thing
is,
it's whether the collection fund has a surplus or a deficit is
Yeah.
what the council's trying to calculate.
Yeah.
So we know that after a period of time, once the debt gets to between 3 to 4 year old, there's not much chance of collecting it.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I'm really trying to get to. Actually.
If
Yeah.
it's that you're talking
Yeah.
about, we
Yeah,
have a
it is
feel
really.
for
Yeah.
that, but it's not an average as such.
Right.
And we'll be doing the write-off report is coming in September, so it will have all the write-offs on for council tax, business rates, housing rents, sundry debt, etc. And that's coming to yourselves in September. So
Right. Okay.
next
All right.
month.
That'll be
So
interesting to
you'll
see
get the
that.
full write-off report then.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Thank you.
So thanks for the very comprehensive report, Steve. And impressed by the work that's been carried out, and in very difficult times. A couple of questions from me. One was about the enforcement action. You did say it was rather similar to the enforcement action work that has been done by Matthew's team. So I looked at that and thought, well, why isn't there maybe a single enforcement team which does enforcement type actions as opposed to separating those out? Why can't it be one team and with all the efficiency of working that way and that flexibility? So that's one question. Yeah. The other question was about all the intelligence we've gathered through the grants process about Kirklees businesses. I mean, effectively, this is like a business census of knowledge that we've gained that we would never ever have gained under other normal circumstances. It sounds to me like a rich source of data in, apart from simply the contacts we've made, all those things that come with that. And I'm wondering really about the best use of that information. What can we use it for? Is there the capacity to make best use of it? And also, is there any restrictions on the use of the data that we gathered from businesses? So, as in, because we've gained it for this purpose, we can't use it for other purposes because of data protection issues and things like that. So those two questions really are sort of things that I've been pondering. So
okay, just on your first one, then I think you're entirely right about the corporate debt approach. I've had a few discussions with Eamon about doing corporate debt specifically now that K&H have come back into the council. There is an argument for doing corporate debt, and we are looking at doing a paper probably later on this year about how that might work. And I think you're right that there is an opportunity to link some of those cases together, whereas, I don't know, Matthew's team might be pursuing someone under sundry debt, and the high level sundry debt might come to my team as well. And then we might be looking at somebody for business rates or council tax, and they might only have definitive level of income or spare income. So you just won't want to make one arrangement if you're the customer rather than several arrangements with the council. And I think that's entirely right. And I think the same thing applies to direct debit, where you could have a corporate direct debit and sign them up for every debt that they have, not just council tax sending them a direct debit form, Matthew's team sending them a direct debit form. I think there are synergies there as well. And we are looking to create something similar to the citizens account. We would create a staff account or something where we're able to view all the debts, and that's the complexity that we have, that all the debts are on separate systems running under separate legislation. We don't have a single system to view them on, but we could in theory use the reverse of the citizen portal in a staff portal. We already have all those links there, so we are looking at that.
So would it be possible to come back to us with an update on that, Steve? Because it sounds like a really interesting piece of work, and something that there could be some real efficiencies with. I mean, I'm aware that here and there we'll have some wrong-uns who don't pay the rent and don't pay the with council tax and don't pay this and don't pay that. I'm thinking of people, even at this very moment, who fit into that category, and ensuring that that we're actually looking at that on a corporate basis. Can you be run by somebody?
Not me.
If whoever's got the phone ringing, if it can go on mute. Okay. So I think it sounds like one of those things where it's just calling out for a sort of a reorganisation. I won't use the term rationalisation because people have a dim view of that, but at least reorganising our services in such a way that we can be more efficient. So that'd be great to look at. And the business census question.
Yeah, just before I move off the corporate debt one, we have seen a couple of demos on single systems. So our supplier Northgate are developing a corporate debt solution, an IT solution as well. So there's probably a couple of options for the IT solution for the corporate debt. In terms of the data collection, census stuff, we did write quite a wide-ranging data sharing agreement when we collected all the data, and I think as long as it's not used for some obscure purpose, we would probably be able to share most of the data, but it's very similar to the data we already had on the business rates system, apart from we've collected a lot more payment details because not everyone was on direct debit, but it's basically business account name, company numbers, that type of information. It's probably the stuff we didn't have before is probably the company number or the charity number we may not have been holding before, but a lot of it will have been there already.
Okay,
so
not as much use as...
No, I don't think so, but we would have use of it. If you can think of a use why we'd want to purpose it for something else, we would probably be able to do that. Okay. But in the main, it's probably additional bank details and company house records. But again, if you needed that, you could log on to Company's House direct. We have direct access for that anyway, so I'm not sure there's a massive amount of data that we don't already have.
Fair enough. Appreciate that. Thanks very much. A very interesting presentation. Oh, Philip, is your hand hanging, or have you got another question? Philip Charman. And you're also on mute.
Probably preempting you here, but I have some questions for Eamon when we get the opportunity.
Well, oh, right, okay. Questions for Eamon then.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I noticed that there's on the expenditure side outturn for last year. Can people hear me all right? That there was a significant overspend on environment. What was that particular pressure on? Is Eamon there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
I'm just, digging into deep. While you're looking at that one, there's another thing I wanted there, which is looking at the anticipated sort of local government pay awards and what that pressure might be in terms of that. And then the other find is what the Bank of England anticipates that the inflation rate, which is very high, would now ease off. But is that a safe estimate? So those are three questions really, I suppose. Impact of pay awards, inflation predictions, and then what was the environment cost?
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm just trying to have a quick look and see what certainly on environment. I think one of the factors, I think we touched on it earlier, particularly around things like catering income.
That comes under environment, is it? Okay, yeah.
It does. Yeah, there's a number of there's different things under these headings. I suppose you've got to try and second guess where they're at, but I think there's certainly an impact on. If you look at the 12 points, sorry, just getting to the relevant bit of the the report. So the £12.6 million that you see there, a significant factor was service income lost. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that overall there was 15 million service income loss across the council. The vast majority of that was in environments area.
Right.
All those particular activities, catering income, car parking, in particular, impacted under environment. And I think I said as well that the impact's easing off, and hopefully that will come through in terms of Q1 monitoring position to Cabinet on the 31st of August. But it's still there. It's certainly not going to be on the scale of last year's, but it's still going to be reasonably, I say significant. We'd factored into our annual budget assessment for 21-22 around about a 5 million service income loss overall in 21-22, and it's probably coming in there or thereabouts. So that puts it in terms of perspective, but there's still challenges, as you'll have picked up from Matthew earlier, just in one area. So the issue of the pay award, where it's at nationally, is that the National Employers Organisation submitted the 1.75% pay award. And that's the general pay award, and I think it's 2.75% at the bottom of scale across councils. So it's slightly differentiated. And I think where it's at is that national unions have rejected that. So that will, and I suppose that will, whether it's now down to the unions as to whether or not they want to consult with their members as to whether there's going to be any specific action around that. But I understand that that was the last and final employer offer. So we'd factored in for an average uplift of 2% in 21-22. So it's still to be finalised, and that 2% was, average across the piece. So we're kind of thereabouts in terms of what we'd assumed. But we'll wait and see what the finalised position is and when that will be. Hopefully sooner rather than later. And then the third point about inflation, like a lot of these economic predictions. I think you're right. Bank of England and other national commentators are still of the view that it's a blip, so it will peak and then come back down again towards the latter end of the year, and then it will settle probably round about I think the Bank of England target is 2% over the medium to longer term, but we'll wait and see in that. But clearly it's RPI, CPI nudging up a little bit. It might be interesting to see what the September CPI and RPI figures are, because government uses the September inflation figure for a whole host of issues, and that includes setting our rents for social housing purposes and also around benefits uplifts. So I think that's certainly the September uplift is one to look out for in and amongst. I don't know if that's answered your points.
Well, I think it has more or less. It's just that inflation is... it's difficult to predict. I know the Bank of England says it's not, it's only a blip, but my view is that if we've got supply chain problems nationally, there's going to be a lot of pressures on either trying to increase staff skill, whatever it is, to meet these deficits in terms of, I think it's very much the supply chain. We haven't got the truck drivers we want. We haven't got the supplies coming quite so smoothly from outside the country, and I think it's distribution pressures, and I think that will put costs on. I thought.
No, I agree. There is still some volatility in there, and it doesn't help when the world's largest container ship gets stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal either, which exacerbates supply chain issues. And you're right about it was on national news this morning again, wasn't it, about staff shortages of staff in certain sectors, following on from the early discussion about recruitment issues, where we're trying to get extra capacity in. It's almost counterintuitive, you might think, what's going on, but in other respects, there might be I think some of what national commentators are saying as well, there's a current structural imbalance which will take some time. Clearly there is some continued volatility there, and that might play out in terms of some of our scenario modelling going forward.
So maybe with the next Bank of England report, which is another 3 months or something, I can't remember, it's next June, would give us a clearer idea of how that's happening, perhaps. September sounds quite. Well, September's quite an important time, isn't it? Because as you say, all the benefits, and everything else are adjusted to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Andrew. Eamon, firstly, thank you for the report. And, thank you for all the work that the team have been doing. I sometimes wonder how you sleep at night. The things that you must be having going round.
I don't.
Exactly.
Got a coffee machine.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a nice thing to say, actually.
A couple of questions.
How do you sleep at night, Eamon?
Yeah.
With the lights off, yeah.
Yeah. The first one, just about the increase in reserves. Yeah. So there was a significant increase in reserves. It's quite clear what big chunks of that are, but the numbers don't necessarily add up. So in 1.2, paragraph 4, it talks about the COVID reserve increases at 40 million. I think we're all familiar what that's about. But then in 1.2, the end of 1.3, it represents 49 million reserves increase. So I think we disagree. Unless I've restricted somehow. Are you following me?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, you may not be able to answer it now, Eamon, but it's probably one to look at again before this goes to cabinet, isn't it? Or, wherever this is next.
Are you look? Oh, this. I mean, this is just for corporate scrutiny panel, to be honest.
Right.
So it's kind of a high level. I'm absolutely confident in the figures that are in the cabinet report. I suppose what I was the outturn report. I suppose what I was trying to do was just highlight where some of the key movements were. So if it doesn't look like some of the figures don't reconcile, I think we did have a check of it. Then we can have a look at it again. But
I think just checking through, because it just as I read it straight forward, I'm going. Those numbers clearly look different.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought we'd nailed it. I thought we got it.
And it is the 70 moving parts. I can quite understand that it's not the easiest thing to do, is it?
No, we'll have a look at it. But certainly in terms of the outturn report, I'm absolutely confident. It might just be the way it's explained. I did an unnecessary layer of confusion to it. But I think the general point that we're trying to make with it is that, and it's not unique to us, because councils up and down the land are carrying forward substantial increases in reserves because of the roll forward of the COVID-related funding and managing that over a multi-year period. Some of it's very technical in nature, because what Steve mentioned earlier about the timing of the expanded release was after we'd set the budget. So we get that in grant form rather than government making a baseline adjustment as part of the annual financial settlement. So that's 24 million that we've carried forward from 2021 into 21-22. That will be released in 21-22 against the collection fund deficit. So that disappears straight away. And most of the others also COVID related. I mean, some of the theme of what was discussed this morning, I think from Matthew's area and Steve's area, was around recovery plans and capacity, and managing some of the spikes and the backlog issues and some of the latent demand management issues. So some of those reserves where we have planned to carry them forward as well, even though they're under the general moniker of COVID response reserves, we are identifying and we'll be using some of those to support some of the backlog issues across the council, and using some of the new burdens funding that has come forward from councillors, from government as well. I think that sits under the revenue grant reserve to support again capacity issues in some areas, because we do recognise that there is a blip. So we wouldn't necessarily carry that excess capacity permanently, but we'd hope that over time it would naturally settle down. But it kind of gives you a flavour of how we're trying to manage some of these reserves as well, in the context of sort of COVID recovery. And we will continue to bring reserves updates back as part of the overall review, as we have done in the past, and look at as in conjunction with that how we just set out the reserves, because some of them we do I suppose, add together into high level figures that show as one line across the overall reserves table. So it might be more useful actually, where it makes sense, to actually break those down a little bit more as well for future reference. So you've got more of a feel of what those specific reserves are.
Okay.
I mean, it's in reasonable level of detail, but I think it would help if we can finesse and fine tune it for future reference, and which hopefully will add to our sort of collective understanding of what the movements are and what they're there for.
Okay, a couple of other comments and questions. I mean, the first one is around special educational needs. It sounded like that is moving towards some good news. This has been an issue that we've been facing for a number of years, and it does seem like there are now some discussions, or appropriate discussions, at the ESFA. Right. So it feels like that's finally getting on some traction, because I think it's been one of our biggest worry pre-COVID, wasn't it? That this just seemed to be growing and growing and growing. And I know that there's been, a fair chunk of capital investment to try and address this as well as in the longer term. Yes,
just on the latter, I mean, that ties in with part of the transformation agenda around building district sufficiency to support pupils with additional needs. I mean, that's quite a significant program, and there will be some business case developments coming through later in the year, and that will take some time to kick in. It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably 2-3 years down the line. But yeah, the fact we've had a couple of informal discussions with senior government officials about the high needs deficit position is encouraging. We've still got to finesse our management plan, and what they have said as well is that, look, they've got an increasing number of councils who are on the radar now, and that's only going to grow over time. So what I said earlier about some of what flexibility or what flexibility ESFA may have to support some of the funding requirement going forward, including some of the backdated accumulated deficit, to some extent depends on the outcome of the spending review and what's available in terms of the overall funding pots that central government have got to support sort of bespoke, I suppose, plans at an individual authority level. So they are focusing on those authorities. I suppose I think they reframed it as kind of like the top 20, although that's quite dynamic in itself. So yeah, we'll. I just wonder, Eamon, if it's worth possibly producing a bit of a briefing note on that. For me, certainly, but I think for our MPs, or certainly the two MPs that sit within the government, so that they could perhaps do a little bit of lobbying on our behalf in advance of the spending review. Well, to be honest, it's something that
MPs from all parties can lobby, John.
Yeah. That's how successful they are, Andrew.
Yeah, well, you're right, and in the sense that what can we do? What have we got in our armoury, sort of locally, regionally, to support concerted lobbying into government? Because when they do launch the spending review, there'll be, as you'll expect, there'll be all sorts of lobbying going on with competing demands between government departments, let alone between authorities. So yeah, we need to bear that in mind in conjunction with how the conversations are developing. So I think that's something that we will feed back into the council and into the relevant audiences, because I'm cautiously optimistic at the moment in terms of those discussions with ESFA, but they've been quite cautious as well, purely because they need to understand what the funding position is going forward as well, from DFE, HN Treasury, and how that plays into some of the national agenda. There is, I did mention there's a consultation out on schools funding. That's just come out around progression towards a prescriptive national funding formula. There's also a review of high needs funding plan as well, and send funding as part of that. So some of our local discussions with ESFA may be informed as well by what happens subsequently. So they are looking at that nationally, so that might feed into the spending review as well. So government are actively looking at future funding of high needs block in and amongst.
Just finally then, just on the impact of COVID and the longer term impact of COVID, and I'm hoping some of this is picked up in our transformation activity. So we are seeing a changing model. We've got people who work from home. It's unlikely that everybody will end up working back in the office 5 days a week. So presumably there will be at some point, and I know this has started to be looked at, and I see Paul's got his hand up, he might comment on this, around, you know, reduction of office accommodation and the need for so much accommodation. But also there must be underspends across the various departments. And are we capturing those? And this is just me with a private sector background, that when there's an underspend in the department, the finance team take it off you, so you don't spend it on something else. And if we are carrying levels of vacancies, and this is a common discussion across a whole variety of areas now where we are struggling to recruit, we presumably can only recruit because we have the staffing budget in place. And whilst those staff have not been recruited, what's happening with that staffing budget? So there is an opportunity to look at, you know, are we making sure that we're keeping hold of those budgets centrally rather than letting the teams use them elsewhere? It may be they need to use some of it if they need to bring in contractors or temporary staff or whatever, but clearly if we're carrying levels of vacancies, there is an opportunity there to look at the underspends in those particular departments. And then just finally, one comment around vacancies and the difficulty to recruit, and it partly alludes to what Philip was talking about. We haven't seen furlough unwind yet, and perhaps when furlough unwinds, we may see more people looking for opportunities than perhaps are now, because if they're still being paid, even though their job may not ultimately be still there, there may be a reluctance to jump ship at the moment until they know exactly what's happening. So just a comment on that transformation activity, reduction in office accommodation, and how we are capturing where those underspends are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you for those points. So I think it's right to say that there have been, you're right, there's, given the, I suppose for want of a better phrase, the scale of the hiatus that's befallen on the organisation, certainly through last year and washing through a little bit this year, there has, as I said earlier, there have been areas of a significant spend, and then there have been some areas where things have been put on hold for various reasons. So there has been a little bit of offsetting, undoubtedly. Trying to get to the bottom of that, I suppose, in the midst of juggling so many different funding pots and spending regimes, and you know, to be honest as well, we've got limited staff capacity when we're trying to juggle so many different things simultaneously. To how much can you, in the short term at least, sort of drill down into some of those areas? But I think undoubtedly as we start to transition, those are some of the things that will be on our agenda to actually understand and get a bit of a I suppose more of an in-depth feel for how those things are playing out. So there are a number of vacancies. You're right. In some instances, there will be additional external capacity brought in to support that, and some of those vacancies are in emerging areas. And emergency areas. Yeah, in terms of COVID community response, where you've got additional temporary staff. But I mean, we touched on earlier about regen and blueprint and capacity to support the council's ambitions around capital development as well. So some of the recruitment issues where we're looking to get more staff in is around areas where we'll be seeking to capitalise staff to support some of those broader initiatives as well, in support of our capital plan and broader regen agenda. So it's not necessarily all just revenue, I think is a point. Some of it is about capacity tied into capital. So it will need a bit of unpicking, and then you're looking at, well, what is the scale of that? And I think the other issue about more generally about things like looking at what does home working mean going forward, that's something that's definitely featuring large as part of a concerted corporate review, not just our organisation, but you're seeing it nationally. And then I think again it was on the news this morning. Just not just BBC Radio 4 is not my sole source of information for these sorts of discussions. Other radio stations are available, but about capacity in transport. on the trains and buses. They're starting to get up to what is full capacity as well. So home working's got some massive, significant ramifications. And again, the organisation's not going to flip overnight. So they are looking at all of that in the round. But it might, if there are opportunities there, they're not necessarily going to be overnight. It depends what other things are going to come our way to sort of mitigate some of those issues. And yeah, Officer Com in the round will be looked at, our broader asset strategy. So yeah, it will be teased out and looked at clearly, because some of those issues are structural. There are a number of issues that are blip issues and it's trying to differentiate the two as well. So again, I was just making a general point at the start of my introduction. Don't underestimate still the challenges we're facing in terms of trying to unpick some of these issues, at least for the short term. But yeah, we'll see what we can do in terms of trying to get to the bottom of those.
Okay, thanks all. And Councillor Davies would like to make a statement to the meeting.
Well, that sounded rather formal.
Oh, I don't know. We're very pleased to see you, Paul. Over to you.
Thanks very much, and it's been good to attend. I'm really interested in meeting. I think just going back slightly in terms of Steve and Matthew's contributions. And I'm repeating possibly some of the things already been said, but certainly hugely impressive in terms of the balance. I think that's been achieved with regards to that balance of looking after our businesses, our residents, ensuring that we create that viable future, and at the same time ensuring that income is coming in, that we are pulling in those financial resources for our services as well. So I think a fantastic balancing act, which as I said, I'm hugely impressed with. And I have to say, going back to sleeping at night, I don't know if you guys managed to do it as well. And I think certainly in terms of the staffing pressures, I think that in itself has been a feat as well in terms of getting through that and the redeployment, which kind of brings me onto the recruitment. And it's already been mentioned again about sort of it's counterintuitive in a sense of, I think it was Eamon who said it, that we're in this situation of wanting people. We know that there are issues out there in terms of people in terms of their employment. And I've spoken to Deborah Lucas, who's the head of HR. I've spent quite a bit of time with Deborah, talking through with her about the approaches we take into recruitment and the more innovative approaches as well. I don't know if this. I think it's a combination of things. I think the point, like Councillor Taylor, that John's raised about furlough may well be in there as well. I'm sure there'll be an element of that. I'm sure there's elements of public sector image of what Kirklees is about, and I think that links to some of the things I've been discussing with Marcus as well in terms of comms. Very much about how do we communicate more widely about what we do, because I'm particularly with this portfolio on corporate now, it is absolutely amazing. You look at some of the things that we do, and just if we take libraries as an instance, looked at the annual report that Carol Stump produced, and the contribution that service is making to our communities is tremendous. So I think part of it is around that. I certainly think the approach that Steve's taken, and I know it's happening elsewhere, around succession planning is absolutely fantastic. Having worked myself in the private sector, it was one of the major issues we always faced, and it's good to see that planning's in place. So I'll be following up with Deborah on this issue anyway. So it was good to hear that, because I wasn't aware of all of the sort of pressures. I was aware of some of them. And also I'm following up with Marcus around the comms and how do we actually ensure that that we are communicating out to our citizens and potential employees about what we're about. Interesting one on the sort of pay award. I think there's a little bit of trepidation from everyone on this one, because obviously pressures are built up over a number of years in the public sector. And clearly public sector unions are having those discussions as to what their response would be now going forward to a final offer, a full and final offer. And well, I don't think anybody at this stage can forecast that one, but that obviously could have potential ramifications for us and other areas in the public sector. And I think Eamon, has covered the bits about the underspend, but I think it is a fair point that you raised, John, and it's something that definitely we have to be aware. Same as you, I spent most of my life in the private sector, and certainly having worked for an American company in particular, they usually want an answer within about 2 days. In terms of what savings, they're very much our masters, as they were in the States, wanted to know that. So yeah, we'll definitely keep a focus on that and look and try and understand what we're doing. But I think Eamon covered that point as well. So it's just my general comments. But thanks for allowing me, Chair, to be on the meeting. I know anybody can come in, but it's very nice to make a formal statement and to be allowed to come in there, and it's always good. But no, I think it's been a very good meeting, and once again, Matthew and Steve and Eamon, of course, thanks for the contribution and the fantastic work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. And yeah, always good to see you. And yeah, one of the things I think one of the things that's come out of it, there's all sorts of things come out of this meeting. I mean, obviously the things I've been interested in are the rationalisation, reorganisation of our debt collection services. I think there's certainly things that could be done along those sort of lines, and I'll be interested to sort of follow progress on that. Okay, been a really interesting meeting. We've learned a lot, and thank you for all the contributions. I will now draw this meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.